calling all sort of out, newly out, or fully out lesbians. We are going to Provincetown.
Wing Women Weekend, October 16th to 20th, 2024, is your opportunity to join our crew and enjoy Provincetown's annual Women's Week.
One of the biggest challenges we hear from the lesbians we work with, especially those of us new to this community, is how intimidating it can be to connect with other LGBTQIA plus women and to find that all-important queer community.
I know, and you all want to be connected to the community so much and to meet new queer friends. And, hey, you never know, maybe even meet somebody special. But we can also know that it can be super intimidating to do these things alone.
So let us be your co-pilots as we enjoy some amazing activities in Provincetown, one of the gayest small towns in America, during their annual event for queer women of all ages.
Enjoy meeting new friends with us as your wing women.
It's the queer event of the year you won't want to miss.
Details at www.wingwomenweekend.com. That's wingwomenweekend.com.
Hey queer friends, are you ready to be inspired? Welcome to Season 5 of Coming Out and Beyond, a podcast that shares stories from the LGBTQIA plus community. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzel.
Hi, this is Anne-Marie Zanzel, and I want to welcome you back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA plus stories. I am really excited to welcome Anne Russo here today. Anne Russo is a licensed clinical social worker, sex-positive therapist, and founder of AMR Therapy. With over 20 years of experience, she specializes in supporting marginalized communities, particularly in areas of sex positivity, queer issues, and religious trauma. Anne is a dedicated advocate for modern female sexuality and is the author of the upcoming book, Her Own Terms, Navigating the Landscape of Modern Female Sexuality, which combines cognitive behavioral therapy, sex-positive attitudes, and psychodynamic insights to empower women. She also offers training courses and consulting for mental health professionals, focusing on all things queer and sex-positive. Hi, Anne. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
I am too, because we talked a little bit before the show and we have a lot in common to talk about. So, first thing I ask all my guests is to tell me your story.
So, my coming out story is interesting in the sense that I had a gay parent who came out in the 80s. So you'd think that would have made possibly coming out a little easier for me. It really didn't, because I saw what it was like to be out in the 80s. So I was really afraid to come out.
And your gay parent was your dad, right?
My dad, yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Well, of course, in the 80s, I mean, it was horribly homophobic, and of course the AIDS epidemic was raging, and you must have, so how old were you, Anne?
So I was 4 when he came out.
Okay, so you were like growing up in the 80s and you saw your dad going through all this.
Yes, and in the 90s, and yes, the AIDS epidemic very much touched my household, with a lot of his friends passing away, and the pain and challenges around the uptick in the religious right against really showing up against, our community.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want to be part of this community as a child, but I knew when I was in kindergarten that I absolutely was. So I tried to repress that up until moving to California, where I'd been living in Arizona throughout my younger years. And I saw that people my age, high school, were out. This was 90s. I was in shock. I couldn't believe this was happening.
Well, yeah, because Arizona's like conservative, right?
Very.
Yeah.
Very. So all of a sudden, not only could I talk about my sexuality, but I could talk about dad's, because in Arizona, we weren't allowed to talk about it. So we, in high school, I came out to my friends who were already in gay relationships, lesbian relationships, and I pretty much hit the ground running at that point. I started dating in high school. I started the first gay straight alliance in my high school.
For you.
And we were the first high school to march in a pride parade, which was really invigorating and awesome. And so I feel like once I was out, it was easy.
Mhm,
It was the decade before that made it difficult.
mhm, mhm. Now, did you live with your dad?
I did. I actually lived with my dad, my mom, and my dad's partner up into
Oh,
high
wow.
school. Yeah. So
Oh,
we
well,
had
that's
a
a
big
whole other
blended
podcast.
family. Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Really interesting because I have actually interviewed a couple of children of people that came out in the 80s, and a lot of times they developed a really blended family, which was really interesting. So, one of my guests, I believe her name is Anne. Also, it must be the name, but I will attach it to the show. But both her mom and dad were gay, and they both came out, and they had this amazing like family growing up, and unfortunately both her father and his partner, which was like a second father to her, died of AIDS when she was before, like, in her late teens and 20s. So it was really just devastating for her. But I think it's really interesting how people that came out later in life, back in the 80s, often after kids and family, often try to do these alternative families, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you that I think sometimes people will look at that and they'll go, oh, that must have been so difficult, or that must have been so strange, or how weird, or household. I'm happy about the household that I had.
Hmm. Hmm.
The only thing that made that household difficult was the outside world. It
Right.
wasn't the inside world. I had 3 loving parents.
Hmm.
I had great adult role models around me. It was a very loving family. And even back then, your parents are having chosen family who then become your family. And there's just an openness and a love there that's very, very special, that I feel very blessed to have participated in, because I feel like it's really made me who I am today. So I really am grateful for it.
The guest on that called it magical. She said I had a magical childhood because they worked so hard. I believe she had a sister as well. They worked so hard to make the 4 adults, to make the kids as safe and as secure as they possibly could. It was almost like the adults, they know how hard it is out there
Yeah.
for people that are queer, that or people who are queer adjacent, which you were at the time.
Yes.
They almost put a fortress so that when you come home, it is magical and wonderful, and you're safe, which is wonderful. I think
Yes.
a lot of times you guys had much better childhoods than a lot of us did.
Well, the beauty is that I was taught from a very young age to love and accept people as individuals.
Mhm.
So there's no personality, no gender, no skin color that could surprise me, shock me, or I had like a feeling about before I knew who the person was. So I just wasn't taught to be that. I'm not, I know systemically we have a whole host of issues, but in my household, I wasn't taught to be hateful towards anybody, because we were a group that was in essence hated.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So I really admired that about my family, and my mom, especially because she was very understanding to that experience with my dad, and coming from a very Catholic, both from a very Catholic upbringing, and my mom accepted it and still loved him and wanted to participate and be there and raise us, and it was very unique for sure.
It
Absolutely.
is really
Yeah.
unique. So let's talk about your work.
Sure.
Tell me about what you do, and you said that, just tell me what you do and we'll go from
Okay.
there.
Okay. So I run a online psychotherapy practice that I started back in 2018.
Mhm.
The focus is queerness. I also focus on other marginalized groups with some of the other providers, like people of color, differently abled people, neurodivergent people. My focus is queerness and religious intersection, specifically Christianity, because I have my master's in theology as well.
Mhm.
And I always focus on queer liberation theology.
Mhm.
So this practice is built up and it's doing its thing, and I'm very proud of this practice. And now I've decided to go to the next level for myself, and I'm creating training classes, CEUs for therapists to learn more about alternative relationships, queerness, and I'm also writing a book and consulting with mental health therapists so they can do more helpful work with communities they may not be a part of.
Mhm. Okay. What is queer theology?
Hey, love it. Is this a quiz or a question? No,
For people who are listening and saying,
yeah,
"What? There's such a thing." Like I know because I went to divinity school, I know that there's queer theology out
that's
there,
the
but
yeah.
I'm sure most people are like, "What?" They just like drop their phone, you
Ooh,
know.
what? So I look at queer theology and the lens of something called liberation theology.
Mhm. That makes a
Okay.
lot of sense.
Yeah. So liberation theology, meaning Christ as liberator of those that are marginalized within society.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
just take that idea and I think of Christ as the liberator of the queer community. And
Mhm.
so and you can use biblical verses, understanding of different biblical stories or religious traditions to really back up and empower yourself within that theology so you can still have a healthy relationship with uh Christ. I'm using, Christianity, the
Right,
Christianity.
right.
Yeah.
What is your belief system?
My belief system is I have absolutely no idea. And I'm actually very comfortable with that. It took decades to get comfortable with it. The religious studies degrees, the masters of theology, the assessing different churches, having the privilege to go to different countries and see what's going on, missions trips, conservative Christian experience, all kinds of
I've
things.
done all that, yeah.
Yeah, so you know exactly, yeah, what there's like this deep searching. And one day I remember I was lying in bed and I thought, okay, some of this doesn't make sense to me, no matter how much I want it to. And some of it does. And if there is a God who's all knowing, all powerful, all loving, gave me a brain, I'm going to use it.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm going to say, I don't know. I'm okay with it. But I know that there's something more than myself. And I'm on a journey to connect with whatever that might be. And the more I learn, the closer I get.
Um, so that sounds a little bit like agnosticism. Would you say are you an agnostic then?
I
You believe in something greater than yourself. You're just not sure what it is.
I feel like that would be the closest
Mhm.
within my own belief system, but I'm very cautious with that because I'm versed in other traditions, I'm never trying to convert someone to my belief.
No,
You know what
that
I mean? So
you know,
it,
as someone who worked as a chaplain for a long time, my faith undergirded what I did. It's why I did what I did. But when you are like a clinically trained chaplain, you're there. People call themselves chaplain, and they're trying to save people. But if you're a clinically trained chaplain to work in a secular institution, you're trained to be very accepting of all religions, and not only accepting but understanding of all religions and stuff like that. So I really understand that. Um, can I ask, do you think the religious searching that you went through had anything to do with your queerness? Like more in the sense of you trying to figure out if this, being queer was sinful.
I never thought it was sinful, but I was very curious why other people thought it was.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, so it was almost like the opposite experience happened to me. I was raised to view Christian people as sinful.
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Mhm.
these are the people that are wrong.
Stay away from them.
Yeah, get away from them. Horrible, horrible people, right? So I'd watch them on TV and on Donahue, and I'd be like, oh my, they really do have a lot of nasty things to say.
Mhm.
What's going on here? So as I got older and I started meeting people in my social circles that were Christian, I was curious. What are they thinking? What are they believing? So I started going to church, exploring things. While the faith in its most fundamental form did not resonate with me, I really enjoyed the people and I really loved understanding why they believed what they believed, how they believed it. And then I'm like, there's something here. I need to figure out what it is. So I did the academic researching. So
Mhm.
I think that there was a part of me that was trying to, like, is this true? Being gay wrong? Is it right? But in my heart, I never felt like it was wrong. I think
Mhm.
I was trying to have the words and the knowledge to show other people that it wasn't wrong.
Mhm. I could see that. I can.
Yeah.
So when you start working with somebody who comes from a conservative religious tradition, what are some of the things that you see, especially if they're trying to embrace their queerness, whether they're 20 or 50? Like,
Yeah.
what are some of the things you see? Because Anne and I, before we started recording, we were talking, and I said I exclusively work with women because I have to untangle what religion has taught us about being a woman before I can even get to the queerness. And she goes, oh my, we were like, oh, our people. So let's talk a little bit about that, like Christianity and womanhood, femalehood. um,
Yeah.
mhm,
Yeah. So in my book, I dedicated a chapter to this. I feel like I could have written 50 books on this alone, but in this chapter, what I tried to do is set the groundwork for what the church fathers were saying about Christian, or excuse me, what the church fathers were saying about women.
mhm,
So what is the foundation of this particular faith
mhm,
as we're viewing genders?
mhm,
So we're looking at not just what we're seeing biblically is this idea of the Virgin Mary, the sinful Eve, the harlot Mary, but now we're taking all of these archetypes,
mhm,
right? And now how are they being understood in the as it's being written by the church fathers as this religion is being formulated over a 300-year period
mhm.
before it becomes, the empire, the Roman Empire's religion.
Right.
So women are dirt.
Mhm.
They're inhuman temptresses of evil. And I think we have to, whether we like it or not, and I have yet to meet a woman who likes it, when we look at what's being said, it gives us a kind of a like a more clear foundation of how this came to be. Now, this isn't my way of saying don't be a Christian. This is my way of saying understand where some of this is coming from.
Mhm. Mhm.
Were these ideas about women, these ideas about men, and then let's go through the history of a woman's place for 2,000 years.
So how do they account for Jesus ministering to women, though, like the church fathers? Because what I found very interesting about okay, so when I was in seminary, I
Yeah.
wrote a paper about how women heralded each one of Jesus's ministries. I talked about Mary at the wedding at Cana. I talk about the Syrophoenician woman at when she like when they when he says about the master's dogs. It's the only text in the Bible where Jesus seems really rude to somebody. And then Mary Magdalene in the garden at the and all three. I think all three are in the Gospel of John. I know just Mary, the wedding at Cana and Mary in the garden, like where he talks to her, is in John. I can't remember if the Syrophoenician woman is in John. I don't think so. I think that's in the Synoptic Gospels. So did they just ignore all that?
Yes, it's interesting that you brought up the Synoptic Gospels, because when I'm looking at some of the like Gnostic writings, we see more prominent pieces of even Mary Magdalene. Like, what does her relationship to Jesus look like? Some have argued, is this actually his wife? I don't know if I want to necessarily go that far, but what I do want to say is that there was a special relationship that gets tossed to the side. Like,
Well,
and
because I also think when people say that she's his wife, it it lessens the relationship, because she can't just be his student, because she calls him rabbi. She can't just be a student, or she can't be the benefactress, because Magdalene, wasn't that the city for some die back in that time, and so she could have been his benefactress and been the person that like sort of financed his ministry. But I feel like when we like it's like we have to yoke women with a man to make her valid.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Mhm.
yes, exactly. His wife. And I always think it's interesting too when we talk about Mother Mary,
Mhm.
the Virgin Mary, as though her only attribute is her virginity.
Mhm.
We're calling her the Virgin. I mean, really? And then on top of that, she in tradition remains a virgin, as though being sexless is what makes her pious and worthy of the role of being God's mother.
Mhm.
And
But
then what? Yes, yeah,
but also too, that was, that, I mean, Caesar's mother was a virgin too, right? I mean,
yes. These
so
traditions.
like
Yes,
there's
there's this
yeah.
traditional, like that. Just this idea of women are supposed to be virginal. They're supposed to be sexless, yet they're supposed to be mother. I mean, it's a this contrary existence that is impossible to meet.
Correct. Correct. And so when we start, I mean, like we just sort of did a very like Reader's Digest version of all of this. And this
Yeah.
stuff is really fascinating if you really want to go and read about this. But so when you're working with modern day women, how does that all how does that all affect them so that they hesitate to leave bad marriages, whether they're gay or straight, it really doesn't matter.
Sure.
They hesitate to step in to who they were created to be because of this messages from the church they received.
The process can be very, very slow.
Mhm.
Okay. And that's something that I think is important for listeners to understand too, because I think we have this idea of going to therapy and in 2 weeks we feel better and we do. No, this is a lifetime of messages, and these are intergenerational messages.
Correct, which are almost in our DNA.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Right.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I think is very important is for them to spend some time trying to understand what the messages are that they've even received.
Mhm.
Right. So it's like, what are the messages and where are they coming from?
Mhm.
That exploration in itself can take a while, because we're looking at culture, school, parents, religion. I mean, there's just it's work, like just all these different facets. Right.
Mhm.
And then from that work, what of these messages do you feel is repeating to you that's unhelpful?
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, are you placing a value on these messages because of the messages or because you actually believe them? So trying to parse out someone's own idea of morality, ethics, values, desires, away from what's just been taught to them. Again, difficult work,
Mhm. Mhm.
because then what you'll find happens too is the message is so powerful, and they're brain changing messages. I mean, your brain has developed. It's created little creases,
Mhm.
in your mind that just keeps those patterns on repeat. So you literally have to spend time changing your brain.
Oh,
Talk.
I absolutely agree. I like when I do my workshops for people coming out later in life, we talk about cognitive dissonance because a lot of times you keep receiving messages that you're not straight, but you keep ignoring them because you've told that being not straight is bad. And you're like, I have to stay on the straight and narrow, pun intended. And so you keep doing that. And so and I talk to my clients about like, you have to make new neural pathways.
Yes.
And my first 5 years of after coming out, it was really hard because I had and, like, nobody was doing this work when I came out, so and then after I came out, it's like somebody's gotta start doing and now there's lots of women doing this work. But what I realized is that it took a while for my brain to go from being, straight to being queer. It took about 5 years of, like now I can hardly remember the person I was before because I've been out, like, 8 years now, but in the beginning, it was incredibly difficult. And my coming out was tied to my ordination. So because, um, I got ordained and I came out 3 weeks later, and it had nothing to do with me hiding it or anything like that. I was in a very progressive denomination. My coming out was like a poof, you know?
Yeah.
Didn't
Yeah.
really but I do think that, like, so there's a piece of me, like the very intellectual piece of me that says, oh, it's because you were thinking about all kinds of stuff. You were working towards this ordination for 10 years because I had started the process 10 years before. And then there's the other part of me that's spiritual and that says God ordained your whole self. And so
Mm.
when I got ordained, the part of me that was queer was ordained as well.
Oh, I love
And
that.
so that's why 3 weeks later, I started the process. It was the third time I came out. And it was the process of me, um, you know, letting go of everything I thought about the world. And as a minister, like I was really pissed off at the higher power, God, universe, whatever you call it, because my life fell apart, just absolutely fell apart for several years. And it really has only been back together like 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah.
But it fell apart, everything I thought. And I was really, really angry at God. And I was really happy to talk to some people that have been out. My wife and her cousin, who's a good friend of mine, he sings in the Methodist choir in his church. And um, they said that they were really angry at God when they first came out, and they were both agnostic, for a while, and it took them a while to get back to some belief system. So I felt comfort in the fact that I was really pissed, and other people say, "Yeah, that happens. You get really upset." And so for me, it was like, even though I considered myself a feminist, even though I considered myself really well educated, my God, those messages were so incredibly deep in me that kept me in my marriage for 27 years, even though I knew in year two I should probably leave, but I couldn't because as a good Christian girl, Catholic girl, I was trained to put everybody else's needs before my own. And once I had children, forget it, you know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And forgetting your own needs and figuring out what does it mean to be empowered in your own needs. What does it mean to be selfish versus selfless versus empowered? Like, I mean, there's so many areas of gray. And I
Mhm,
feel like we have to, as helpers,
mhm,
right, is hold space for someone to start to like pull some of that apart.
mhm.
And like you said, with the neural pathways and the 5 years, yes, and help people understand, like give them that psychoeducation, like your brain,
It's gonna take a time. It's
you've
gonna take
rewired. It's going to
Yeah.
be rewired. Things that feel 100% correct to you is nothing more than a neural pathway.
Hmm. I agree. And then you sort of, I always say that like my coming out, even though I was very progressive and very liberal before I came out. So I didn't have to, and like people that come out from very conservative worlds, I can't imagine. I like I always say my lens changed. The lens that on which I looked at the world totally changed. And and now I feel like it's just an amazing thing to happen in your 50s, because a lot of times and when you're 50s people are like really getting settled in for their old age, and like my world. So, but it's like I'm so happy with my lens now, because
Yes.
I'm also with people that I jive with better, you know?
Yes. Yes.
So when somebody is considering, you know, like when I'm sure you get a lot of young people that are like, don't have the benefit of wisdom, that are like in their 20s, and they have been indoctrinated in evangelicalism, Catholicism. There's a big, strong conservative Catholic movement going on now too.
Yeah.
How do you help them realize that it's okay to love themselves in a really healthy way, and they're not being wrong or evil if they're thinking about themselves? Because Christianity is all about, you know, uh, taking care of other people.
Mhm. So always starting where the person is at is number one.
Hmm.
Do no harm.
Hmm.
So really being able to assess where someone is at as objectively as possible, trying to you as a therapist, I hear things that may be very uncomfortable for me or trigger me as well. So that's another important piece of it, is to have my own space to deal with those things so I can show up for my clients wherever they may be.
Hmm.
And again, it really does come down to helping them assess their beliefs. I really like to dig deep into childhood and the people that were around them and the dynamics of those people and the experiences. I want to understand deeply where they have the idea, their ideas of morality, their ideas of faith, their idea of communication, relationship, and then slowly just start to look deeper into those things. Well, tell me of an example of this. How did this work? Did you find this work didn't work? So we just it's again, it's just a very slow process of just peeling away layers. It is never telling someone that they're wrong, trying to prove something to them intellectually. It's not going to work.
They have to feel it. Has to
Exactly.
come from inside, even though you may sort of try to guide them to where it
Sure.
comes inside, but you can never. People have to say it themselves.
And I find that if someone is a very strong believer in Christianity, I do like to have them look at Jesus.
Hmm.
So I oftentimes will send them to the Gospels.
Hmm.
Who is Jesus?
Hmm.
What's the message of Jesus? Let's just start here. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What is very fascinating to me is that oftentimes people haven't bothered to look at the scripture themselves or to understand the history of the scripture, how it came together. It's they sit in church and are told what to think and what to believe.
Well, yeah. I mean, I was until I
Yeah.
went to seminary, and one of the reasons I went to seminary is because I really wanted to read the Bible.
Yes.
And I knew unless I had a class to attend, I wasn't going to do it on my own.
I love it. I'm going to school. Relatable. Yeah.
I, because I had a real, I understand that. And so when people begin to start like reading just the words of Jesus, like reading a red letter Bible, which is just the words of Jesus,
Yes.
or
Yes.
like when they start to unpeel what they've taught or were taught and start to really think about Jesus, what are some of their impressions?
I love that. Jesus is that's where I come back to the liberation of theology. Jesus is bucking the entire system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The whole entire time.
Yeah, the entire Jesus is a true revolutionary
Mhm.
in every sense of the word for the time period and the culture in which he was raised.
Yes, he was.
And that is incredible. I mean,
To be a 33 or 30-year-old man wandering around Israel not being married is revolutionary for that time. Having women in your groups is revolutionary. Sitting down with, prostitutes and lepers and tax collectors was revolutionary. Like, people don't understand how revolution. It would be like, oh, can we give a for instance?
yeah.
Help me, because I can think of a for instance for and if we can cut this so it's a little bit quicker.
Okay, yeah, I mean, it's so wild, right? Like, it's just so wild.
It
I
would
don't.
be like the Pope going to a gay bar and dancing at it.
Yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yes. Like, just the Pope being like, yeah, exactly.
It would
Heading the
be like,
gay
it'd be
pride
like,
parade and going into sex clubs and having a drink with people. Like,
right.
that's,
It
yeah,
would be like, the head rabbi of the most conservative synagogue in Brooklyn, New York, going out and having coffee with a group of women.
yes, yeah,
That's
yes,
exactly, that's like, it's something that was just not done. And we lose so much because people don't understand the culture of that time. And
yeah,
so to have women following him around, to do what he did was and and guess what happens to him? The state kills him.
yeah,
That's what happened. And it wasn't the Romans, it was the
yeah.
Jewish synagogue leaders that killed him. And so, do people realize when they like sort of really look at this for the first time and say, "Oh my God, I've been taught such a different Jesus than I ever thought existed"?
I know, and and yes and no. It's like, there's this reinforcement that's taking place of, oh my gosh, Jesus is loving, Jesus is a revolutionary, Jesus does accept people. I'm like, okay, what is the foundation of your Christian belief? What do you have to do? Most people, I have to be saved by Jesus. I
Mhm,
have to believe in Jesus to be saved, right?
mhm.
Okay. So what does that mean? If you're following Jesus, if you're saved by Jesus, who is this? Are you following this? Like, let's talk about this. What does this mean? And trying to just pull apart some of this stuff. I had a client not too long ago who was really involved with a very fundamentalist teaching, very specific to one church.
Mhm.
And we spent a year pulling apart the Bible, a year.
Mhm.
And she's exploring different churches and looking at different things, but it's very difficult
Mhm.
because it's that pushback within her own mind, like we're talking about the neural pathways. But I also know, because of her faith, keep praying, keep looking to Jesus, like, trust that process.
Mhm. Mhm.
Are you where, what do you feel when you're trying to make yourself something over here versus letting yourself be free over here? And that's that question of, like, being a queer Christian,
Right.
right? How can you be a queer Christian where you can only show up as one of those identities?
Mhm. Mhm.
You're going to be physically ill, you're
Mhm.
going to be sick, you're going to be emotional. You cannot show up as only part of yourself in a community and have to hide the other part.
Well, yeah, and it's not all, and it's also not all Christian communities.
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
and that's the thing. What I have found amazing is that I grew up in very liberal Catholicism back in the 70s. So, like, I was the first group of girl altar servers on my. I always had like a pull for all this stuff.
Love it.
And in fourth grade, I was probably 10, so it was 1974. And I lost my train of thought here. Um, What were we talking about?
Liberal Christians
Okay,
versus
yeah. So what was really interesting, so for me, I always knew there were all kinds of flavors of Christianity because I was taught that. Of course, I was taught that Catholicism was the one true church, but
course, yeah.
but I knew there was. What is really amazing to me is I've met so many later in life gays that didn't like, they thought Christianity was just one flavor.
Yep.
We didn't know that there were all types of Christianity, from incredibly progressive Christianity to incredibly conservative Christianity. And that happened, about, 1520. It all started to fall apart. And do you think we're in a part of a new Reformation now?
Something is definitely changing. There's as of 10 years ago, I know there was like over 20,000 different denominations of Christianity in the United States. 20,000.
Hmm.
And I do see that people are not equating their religiosity so much with how they feel about the queer community or LGBTQ people in the same way, even when I was, coming of age 20 years ago. I do think things are changing, things are shifting, and we need to be able to have our spirituality and our queerness, if we're Christian and queer, like those spaces need to exist, and they do exist. And
They
I think
do.
it's really important. I love that you're like emphasizing that message, because just because you may not be able to be your full authentic self in one church space,
Right. There's other churches that,
God's throwing you away.
yeah,
God's
no,
not throwing you away.
no, because there's other church spaces that are thrilled that you're coming in, because churches
Yes.
are actually dying, and more Americans don't identify as anything than ever before, which is amazing. I'd love to ask you a couple questions since you're about sex positivity.
Yeah.
What does the church do with
Wait. Say that again.
how does Christianity mess up people around sex? Straight or gay? Doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter.
Oh, no. The religious shame around sexuality is
Is really incredible. Can I tell you? I'm going to share. I've shared this before on
yeah,
this podcast.
please.
When I first slept with my wife, um, it was the first woman I had slept with, and I remember being stunned because for a fleeting moment through my mind, because I'm a pretty sex positive person, came the thought, "Is this sinful?" I was a good ally. Like, I didn't think it was sinful. I always talk about internalized homophobia as, I'm okay if everybody's gay. I don't care about that. The only person who can't be gay is me.
Yes.
That's how I define.
Yes.
Yeah, I just can't be. I wanted my kids to be gay.
Yes. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
um, um, uh, and so I was stunned that I thought that. And also, when I was a young girl and I had sex with a guy for a first time, I was like 19. I remember not liking it. It wasn't very good, but I was also smart enough that I know that I had been trained since birth to wait until I was married. So I was like, oh, it's because I'm guilty. I guess I'm guilty, and that's why I don't like this. But, and so it had totally so many mixed messages in my head, about my father was actually much more uh like, he was much more accepting of like me sleeping with somebody before marriage. My mother was not. You were a whore if you slept with someone before marriage. It was just the what it was.
Yes.
So how does, like, all this religiosity, so here's just this little Catholic girl telling you her story. Like,
Mhm.
how does it affect people? And again, I guess I'm sure it goes back to neural pathways and stuff like that. But how can people start thinking about sexuality and not being shameful? Like, not feeling like there's something wrong with them, not feeling guilty that they're having sex with a man or a woman. Like, how do people begin to work through that and let go of these things? Because I personally don't believe that God really cares if we're having.
No, I feel
And
like
our
there
bodies are made for pleasure. You know?
Yes. I mean, we're talking about a loving, all-knowing, all-powerful deity creating you to be a certain way and then telling you that it's wrong. I mean, I find that to just not,
Makes sense.
yeah, it just doesn't fit.
Hmm.
With that said, I actually want to just give you a little touch of history too, because I have the exact opposite experience
Hmm.
of your experience. And I think that I love that, because I think that can give such,
Because we all have different experiences.
yeah. Yeah. So, I was raised in a very, very sex positive household, in a positive household that was so sex positive that it confused me about what my own ideas of consent and what I was comfortable with.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I had to do the opposite work.
Hmm.
I had to go, okay, do I actually like this? Do I actually want to do this? Does this feel, d- am I being sex positive because I want to be sex positive in this way? Right. So I had to like change
Yeah,
this,
I can
what
see
it
that.
meant to be sex positive.
Right. You were conditioned to be sex positive.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and sex positivity meaning kind of the free for all version of sex positivity.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I had to learn that sex positivity was not this free for all version, and it wasn't this closed off kind of version
Everything's
either, right?
wrong.
Yeah, everything's wrong and then everything's right, So where I've landed is, if it's right for you.
So
Who?
that's your definition of sex positivity.
Yes. So
Okay.
sex positivity can literally mean I'm asexual and I never want to have sex. That is sex positivity,
Hmm. Hmm.
because you're honoring yourself.
Yes.
It can mean I want to be comfortable with this, and the messages of society have told me that this is not okay, and I'm with a partner who's going to teach me to love sex and to be a sexual being.
Hmm.
And that's sex positivity, working against messages that have harmed you about sex.
Hmm.
So it's sex positivity is never one thing. It can be a million different things, with the core message of being authentic to self, and respecting and honoring and treasuring other people's ability to consent.
I
Or
love you really, I'm like, okay, this is what I learned from Anne. That so what I know now is that sex positivity is individual. And what is sex positivity to me may not be sex positivity to you. And
well, it would still be under the definition of, but we may be experiencing it in a different way.
say more about that.
Okay, so like we're agreeing that sex positivity is about absolute enthusiastic consent to what you choose to do or not do, and respecting that in someone else. Period.
Hmm.
That's positivity. Now, how I choose to express my consent or lack thereof,
It's
that,
different.
yeah,
I get
that's
it.
how I decide. Yeah.
I get it. Hmm. So has all this work with all your clients led you to write your book, Her Own Terms, Navigating the Landscapes of Modern Female Sexuality? Because what, like you talk about cognitive behavioral therapy, sex positive attitudes, psychodynamics, um, what will people get from reading this book? And who is this book for?
So this book, I hope, is for everyone,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it's definitely geared towards mental health providers to work with mental health providers are notoriously uncomfortable around sex.
Oh, yeah. They're horrible working with people coming out later in life, I can tell
Terrible.
you. Yeah.
Terrible. Oh my God, you want me to ask them about their sex life? Yes, I do. Right. So they need to be able to embrace, understand, and go deep.
Hmm. Hmm.
This book is doing this for women.
Hmm.
A
Hmm.
very, very specific niche, because that's what I know.
Hmm.
Right. Then the other piece is for women who want to understand their own ideas about sex and sexuality and where those ideas came from. And it's going to have exercises in there in the book for them to do, just things to think about, understanding the history of women's experiences. and I'm going to share stories of people that I'm allowed to share stories about.
Mhm.
Kind of did in that work in therapy, and also discussions around experiences that I've had moving in different communities and meeting different types of people. Communities that people sometimes get read about, going, oh my gosh, you went to like a kink club. Yes, I did. Oh,
Mhm.
you went to a brothel in Las Vegas and hung out with the sex workers. Yes, I did, because they're people.
Mhm.
You
I would
know,
be fascinated to hear their stories. I mean, like, the next time you go, take me. Because I'd be like, "Oh, I wanna hear your stories." Because
it's
I would just think it would be so interesting.
it's incredible, and there's so much to learn from their life experiences, and so many stereotypes and ideas that are just lies.
Mhm.
Just
Mhm.
absolute
Can you give
lies.
me an example?
Yes, yes. All sex workers don't want to be doing sex work. Okay. Sometimes that is
True.
absolutely 100% true.
Mhm.
And if that is the case, that is not sexual positivity, and we should do everything in our power as a society to prevent that.
Mhm.
With that said, if there is someone who is empowered by sex work, and I have met those people, they feel empowered, they've learned healthy boundaries through sex work, they've come into their own through sex work. They So that was one of the stereotypes that I kind of like broke down. It's like, no, I met this amazing woman at a brothel, and she was sharing with me that she'd been doing sex work for 10 years. She's married, has a husband, has kids, and she would leave for a couple weeks a year, and she'd go work. And
Mhm.
there's all these systems set in place to make it safe.
Mhm.
And that was the other part of it that I thought was awesome. That safety is considered not just sexual safety, physical safety, emotional safety, spiritual safety, right? Like, so it's a system that is set up to do its best to protect people engaging in paid sexual acts. And here's the irony of it too, Anne Marie. It's not really about sex.
No. I don't, I always like in movies, they're always talking to each other and stuff. It's
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
the act may happen, but it's more about human connection, right?
yes. And
Yeah.
that was, she says, I feel more like people's therapist than I do someone that they're just having sex with.
Mhm.
So that to me speaks also to another issue within our society that people are in positions. I'm happy that it exists, but people have to pay for intimacy. Intimacy is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, true.
Right.
Mhm.
So it's there's I think that we need to understand these systems and why these systems exist before we put them down and legislate them and decide that things should be this way or that way without really understanding or participating on some level, or looking at like really getting in there and doing the work.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, currently that is not going to happen anywhere,
No,
unfortunately.
I know. But you know what? We have to keep
Just
pushing the wave. We got to keep pushing the wave.
absolutely. I have one last question before we get to my final questions. How have you seen purity culture affect women's sexuality over the last 20, 30 years? Because I've had a purity culture expert on who is a therapist that works with women that have gone through. Most of my clients have gone through purity culture, um, and it messes up men and women so horribly. Um, so tell me your take on it.
I think it's extremely toxic,
Hmm. Hmm.
period.
Hmm.
And like you said, men and women,
Hmm.
they're taught ideas about sex and relationships that is unattainable, unrealistic. And then I watch these people that do come together, and what their view is of like a monogamous, you're my first, that have come out of purity culture, that don't even know how to engage in a healthy sexual with their spouse.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I find it to be very toxic. I think it has absolutely nothing to do with God or Christianity, or it's its own separate entity that is very damaging.
Where do you think it comes from? Because so many of the women I've worked with come out of purity cultures, especially people below 50. It got really bad in the 90s. So the kids that grew up in the 90s, you know, fathers were walking them down the aisle in white dresses and putting rings on them and all kinds of things about purity culture. And like, what, like, what have you seen with people and like how it has damaged them? I know, like, for example, so many people, so many men have porn addictions because there's no realistic teaching about sex whatsoever. And then a lot of people, when they finally do marry that one, right, they have no idea what they're doing. They're
Oh,
young. And also, too, what I've heard from a lot of women is I've been told since I was 7, sex was bad, 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 bad. Oh, now you're married. Go have fun. And it's like it doesn't work that way.
oh no, we have to teach healthy sexuality. And I think it's fear.
Mhm. Oh, I asked you, where do you think it came from? You said it had nothing to do with religion. Where do you think it came from? Where do you think this whole purity culture movement came
Oh, okay.
from?
What I don't think it has to do with it. It's in religion, but I don't think it has to do with a religion.
Mhm.
I'm saying that correctly.
I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. Like you don't have to be a Christian and participate in purity culture. That has
Oh,
nothing
it's
to do.
all over the
Yeah,
whole world.
yeah, exactly. Like so, I think it comes out of fear and misogyny.
Yes. I think
It,
it has comes up out of subjugation of women and fear of women's sexuality.
yes, exactly. Right. Let's go back to those earlier church fathers, and we'll see that throughout all the different, world
They're,
faiths.
yeah, they're afraid because on some level, especially for with men, some men and women have a real power over them with their sexuality, and I think men like to be in charge.
Yeah.
And I think that powerful sexual women scare them.
Absolutely. I would love to do some research on even the biology around that. I just find that whole subject very interesting. I feel like I have the cultural and the societal piece, but I'm like, what's the depth of the biology driving this? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, that would be a really interesting your next book.
Yeah, I find it, but yeah, oh my gosh. Yeah, 5 years. Give me 5 years.
And did you have a coming out song?
You know, I was thinking about that, and the closest I could get to is the song Sunday Morning by No Doubt.
Okay.
Because as when I had my first love and things didn't work out, and I'm in high school, and you know how it is. I
Yeah.
just played that song on repeat,
Mhm.
so it was like my I'm totally into this girl kind of thing.
And did you read any book or movie that really changed your perspective on things?
I like the book Conversations with God. I
Who is
really
that by?
So it's by a guy named Neil Donald Walsh. It's maybe 25 years old.
I think
He
I
said
remember that book.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like he states that he's communicating with God. Whether or not that's true, I'm not overly concerned with, but I enjoyed the messages of a human connection in the book. I thought it was written very well. And of course, I was in the heyday of But I'm a Cheerleader was coming out, and Kissing Jessica Stein, and all these, lesbian movies. The L Word, was when I was in college. So I was in kind of the heyday of when that started. So,
One of my favorite movies is But I'm a Cheerleader. So a lot of things I do, like my wife has the ones from the 80s, but she came out in like 1985. And so like I remember watching Desert Hearts with
I
her.
knew you were gonna say Desert Heart. else I
But
do.
what I do with my women, with the women I work with, is that I have them watch their movies from their generation, and actually there were so few lesbian movies that even if you came out in the 80s, you were watching the 90s lesbian movies.
Yeah, sure.
There was like just a handful. So I've seen them all. Like I watched my wife never had watched the L Word, and when we started dating, we watched it together, and both of us were like, "Oh, this is so
Yeah,
bad."
yeah,
It's a soap opera. It's just a soap opera.
totally a soap opera, but I tell you, I didn't miss an episode when it was coming
Yes.
out.
Of course, there's a lot of sexy scenes in that show, but a lot of times I think it's really important for us to consume the culture. If you're coming out late and you're listening to this, figure out when your peers would be like of age from 18 to 30 and consume the media content, because you'll first of all be able to join in the conversations when people start talking about it, and also too you'll see what they were learning when they were 18. So
Oh, I love it. That's so true. That's a cool idea. I like that. I'm
yeah,
stealing
it's really actually it's and
what I
I
I'm
have
stealing
done I have watched everything, you know, because I like my wife, like we've watched a lot of the old movies and stuff like that. And some are good, some are actually really good. You know, my wife remembers them where the butch always died. So she remembers those movies. So they've gotten a lot better. So Anne, how would you describe your life today?
content. I
Yeah,
feel
I
really
get that.
content. You know,
Mhm,
like it took a while to get here. It takes a while, I think, to get into your own in
mhm.
life. But I feel good. I have a really wonderful partner. I have a nice home. I feel good about who I am as a person and how I'm growing. And I feel like I'm doing the right work.
Mhm.
And
It really
that's a
sounds
really
like
nice place to be. Yeah.
I'd love to go out for a drink with you.
Let's do it. I want to come to where you are.
Yeah, it's fun. We have a lot of lesbian stuff here. Um, how can people find you?
Best way to find me is on my website,
Okay, what is that?
Russo.org.
Mhm.
And I got a bunch of things on there. My social media handles are on there. But I wanted to offer, if there's any therapists out there who's interested, hit me up on my email and I'll give you a discount for consulting services.
Okay,
And it's on my website too, but it's ann@amrtherapy.com.
okay.
Love
Thank
to
you.
offer that to folks. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Well, this was a great discussion. We both sort of tripped in here and like, what are we going to talk about? And you're like, oh my gosh, somebody who knows Christianity. So I really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I hope we get to stay in touch and I definitely want to hit you up for that drink.
Okay, that sounds good.
Yes.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzel. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzel.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzel.com.